Welcome to the second session of Are You Ready Australia? The Future of Indigenous Leadership in Australian Higher Education. This is a conference developed by POSH, SA and NT and facilitated by Campus Morning Mail and Twig Marketing. I'm Tim Winkler and I'll be facilitating this session alongside the conference chair, Director of POSH, SA and NT, Marie Meredith. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we all live and work today, and also pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This session's all about engagement. When an Indigenous staff member speaks at an Australian higher education institution, who listens and who responds? It's a great chance to talk about how we talk, how we engage and communicate and how that comes back. We're joined by two really fascinating people. We've got Professor Bindi Bennett, who is an emerging leader in the sector. And she's previously worked at University of Sunshine Coast, Bond University, and also her current location at Australian Catholic University, where she's her latest work is developing a AI, artificial intelligence, virtual reality type of project to introduce culture into the universities better. We'll talk to you more about that, Bindi, in a minute. We also have Dr. Richard Fijo, who's earned great respect as an elder and cultural educator, working with health professionals for many years. He now works as senior elder on campus at Flinders and is also chair of the Darwin Waterfront, chair of the NT Australia Day Council, and until recently also chair of the Larrakia Nation. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Hey, Tim. Hi, everyone.
Now, Bindi, let's start with you. 4 weeks ago, it was, the ARC announced that you were going to enhance the skills of social work and allied health graduates. I'm just reading this to make sure I get it right this time, to be culturally responsive by engaging students in an Aboriginal-based virtual reality program. Now, that sounds really exciting. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Not yet, but yes. So we're going to be co-designing a program that is actually Sim 2D, 3D based. Some of it will be like an immersive game. And we did talk about this. Some of it, you even get to get the goggles where you can actually talk to someone like Dr. Fijo, for example, not in real time, but he may have been in the game to talk to you about protocols, to talk to you about how to engage rurally and remotely, mainly will be our conversation, and then what cultural responsiveness will actually look like. And we're doing that because a lot of social workers in Australia don't have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander social worker to learn from at the university, but also many of our students don't get a practicum either rurally or in a remote situation. And yet a lot of social workers do go out and work rurally and remotely. So we're really trying to take the burden off the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities that are having those students, but also increasing the amount of cultural responsiveness for our students. So we will have a governance group. We already have one set up across Western Australia and Central Australia. So, and also we'll be co-designing with the Aboriginal-owned simulation programmers. So there's a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voices. If you're interested in being on the governance group, hit me up because we'll also have people from across Australia.
Fantastic. And so one of the reasons that came up is, I guess there is a great burden, if you like, or workload for people with lots of people wanting to access Aboriginal elders, Aboriginal staff members, and there being more demand for access than there being, time in the day for those people. Is that one of the challenges, that sort of cultural cultural challenge?
Well, I'll answer first, but I think Dr. Fijo might be able to say it too, because constantly I actually have just started a new workplace and my boss said to me, you are getting at least one ask from someone outside a day. And that is for me, that's small. It'll be more for respected elders and respected community people. We are constantly having to engage and upskill and capacity build, and also being asked to come and talk and come and teach and develop micro-credentials. It's actually endless. But as well as that, our community expects us to try to be that conduit for them, because they get even more and it's exhausting for them. And the fly-in, fly-out situation is quite a lot. We get students going in, may not stay in that community and then go out again. So it's that constant new person, new set of challenges.
Richie, how do you cope with that? There's a constant demand for your insights and your presence in a whole range of forums. How do you deal with all those demands coming in?
I just accept that's my position. I hold a reasonable amount of knowledge. No one can actually say they know everything, and especially when it comes to Aboriginal culture, because it's so diverse. One place it's right, another place it's wrong. But Dr. Bindias, I actually really look forward to seeing a program like that, because you're right. One of the issues we have is capacity, and it's an everyday event for elders, and it's just doesn't go till 421. It's 24/7. It's weekends. It's nighttime. It's in the shopping center when we're shopping. People are coming up to us and saying, oh, I don't know how to proceed on a cultural matter. Can you give me advice? So I've actually said for a long time, what we have to do is we have to start recording our elders and their wisdom and building it into libraries, so that we can actually start gaining and containing this type of information for future generations.
Are there challenges with that, Richie, in terms of making sure that Aboriginal people retain sovereignty over their knowledge at the same time as sharing it? How do you balance that? And because if you give too much and people just want to keep on taking, how do you balance that recognition and the sharing?
Well, for me, in my opinion, it falls on the shoulders of the informer. So the person giving the information, such as, like, you can talk about men and women's business, but you can't talk about ceremony. So we know our boundaries. I can talk about, limited information, but not taboo information, and part of that information, a really important part of that information, is that people have to know when enough is enough, because there's some things today that are still sacred, and there's some things today that people won't even talk to me about, so there's high level cultural variance right across Australia, and I always think of culture like a volume. So I describe to doctors, you're driving your car, you turn your volume down to 0, you can't hear it. If you turn it up to 10, it becomes deafening. So this is like every person, not just Aboriginal people, but anyone that has a cultural background, so you could say, okay, someone who comes from a low cultural area, they may not even know they're Aboriginal. But if you go way out into the never, you're going to find a high degree of cultural practice. And so when doctors engage with patients, I just connect them to that ideology, because it's the same with language. Do they speak English well, or do they is English their 5th language? So it's just the concept. But departing with information, people have to understand, and we as elders know what we can say and what we can't say. And so when people ask us, and then we have to turn around and say, I'm sorry, I can't talk anymore on this. You don't have to be rude or anything. You could just be polite and say, I can't talk anymore. It's taboo.
Bindi, there are a couple of papers that I noticed you'd written as Maria and I were working on the conference and thinking about, all the interesting work that's out there. There are a whole range of really interesting papers, which I should say are going to be accessed via the conference website, so people can find them there. But you wrote a couple that I'd really like to talk to you about: being on the menu, not at the table, and being an Aboriginal academic, it's like the Hunger Games. Now, there's a couple of, they're really interesting titles, and obviously you've got a great talent for conjuring up titles that are really going to engage people. Tell us about those issues and some of the, have you had much reaction to those articles? Because I found them fascinating.
I think I can't really take credit for titles, because I'm sure that I've heard in the community many times, if we're not at the table, we're on the menu. So I'm sure someone told me that somewhere along the line. So thank you to whoever that was. I don't remember. But I think that's the conversation that for a very long time, and probably even now, we're not always in the meetings where the decisions get made, where the power actually is. We are seeing more and more in higher education, career vice chancellors and deans being able to be at that very powerful situation, but there's still no chancellors, and there's still no real people at the top, if that makes sense. So more and more we're getting there, but often I used to joke that, if I was in the room, I might be at the kiddie table with the plastic fork. I wasn't really getting the voice, and I wasn't really getting vote. I wasn't really getting vote. The Hunger Games one really comes from just that conversation around sustainable resources. I just heard for a long time that it was easier for me to get a grant because I was Aboriginal. It was easier for me to be an academic because I was Aboriginal. There wasn't as much competition because we were less in numbers. But in fact, I found it a lot harder. Because I was often alienated and the only person that was of diversity in a faculty, in a school, in a university. And also because I was actually up against much better academics and much better researchers whenever I went for a grant. So it was actually more fiercely competitive, but also the resources for me in terms of in my personal life, like I still have a very Aboriginal life, and those around me have a very Aboriginal life. So having to do 3 years of community consultation, getting a relationship before even putting in for the sales. Whereas other people can just do their research quite quickly because they don't have to go and ask the community, they don't have to be beneficial to the community. So the Hunger Games did get a little bit of feedback because a lot of people said they didn't know what the Hunger Games was. And I actually say to people, go and watch Survivor or The Traders or the Hunger Games, and then just pretend that each and every one of those people is Aboriginal, or at least every third one, and we'll get voted out first. For sure. Particularly if we voice our truth, our realities, if we advocate, if we're seen as loud in the space, troublesome in the space, as we are when we're leading, we will certainly be noticed positively, but also very negatively.
How do you deal with that, Bindi? Like, I know with the statistics in the Hunger Games paper was 430 academics, Indigenous academics in Australia, and only 20 in your field, which is social work. It's a very isolated position to be in. How does that work on you emotionally, and how do you deal with it?
It can be very difficult because you're trying to push the agenda for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and sometimes I will actually be in a meeting and I will hear things like, here she goes again. Because I'm pushing everything in every space. Don't forget about intersectionality, don't forget about us, don't forget how will that be culturally responsive, how will that be evidenced, how will that be measured, how are we changing skills, knowledges and values, therefore behaviours. I go on and on and on, I bash on, just ask anything. So I think sometimes it becomes about your capacity. Do I have capacity for this fight? Will I actually win this fight? Is it worth going in anyway, despite the fact I'm not going to win? Because at least it would plant seeds for people. But I would have to say you have to be fairly resilient, but it actually does take a really large toll. I have found for myself at times. And it's just lucky that I have incredibly active Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who sustain. If it wasn't for my community, I think I would have become something else really quickly. For them, supporting me, talking with me, debriefing me, encouraging me, telling me I'm going to do it regardless. So we do. But I did say a bit that there's many people that have gone before me that have made it easier for me and made it possible for me to be here.
And I think that's a really important point, isn't it? There are a whole range of trailblazers who are in established positions now, who we sometimes take for granted their journey that they've taken to create these spaces. Richie, I noticed you smiling there before. There's a few familiar points there. Do you find it sort of sometimes difficult to have to keep on representing the same point of view, if you like, or being Aboriginal and perspectives?
One of the things I find interesting is looking at characteristics of people, and I kind of try and read the room, and so you know who people who are going to have different approaches. But one of the things I've learned through governance is actually how to utilize that and turn that around, so you can actually use that knowledge to contribute and facilitate really good outcomes. And but I also know that sometimes there's people in the room. I'm not saying you've been there, but I'm just saying I've met characters before who can be, like to stir the pot a bit, and so you just open it to them and give them a voice and let them voice it and let them be heard, and they feel respected in that space. But I also wanted to agree with Bindi. One of the things is I always say is that it's actually the generations before that opened the door for us. For me, a real leader are the original leaders, and these are the people that, when we became citizens, started pushing to go into those spaces, because we'd never been into those spaces. And sometimes I think of leadership as wearing a blindfold and stepping off a cliff, because this is what it would have been like for them. They would have never had the support mechanisms around them what the people today have around them, and credit to our elders who pushed that boundaries, and they've kind of made life easier for us. But at the same time, I always find myself saying to myself, my elders didn't stand up for me to sit down, so I've got to build on what they started, and I've got to go into the new unexplored spaces. They've never had a chairman at Darwin Waterfront Corporation before, and I'm part of the reason I accepted it is because I want to show our people that we can go into those new spaces.
Bindi, you talked before about sort of one of the challenges of you don't want to be seen as that, that person, or there is a challenge in being seen as that person who is, oh, there she goes again type of thing. Is one of the ways out of that for you that you can publish, that you can be, seen in recognized ways as an academic? Is that perhaps one of the pathways in which you can have a legitimate and recognized voice that is heard?
I think yes and no. Some of my publications, there's spaces where I can be cheekier and more feisty, I believe, and then there are places where you're going to have to write for output for your university that you're going to have to go to a place where you have to be more quiet or thoughtful or conservative. So I think one of the things I'd like to see is more representation of diversity of outputs. So at the moment, we've got an ERA review, some of you may be aware, and I'd like to see how we actually get some of our artefacts, artworks, poetry, and other ways of being out there, so that we don't just have to rely on Western concepts of what is a good output, if that makes sense, what makes a good impact, so that we can actually start to re-Indigenise that space a little bit.
That's a really nice link to something I wanted to bring up with you, Richie. People who are watching may or may not remember, but 2 years ago, you had attention from around the country for when you did a welcome to country. I think it was on consecutive nights, possibly, or a couple of occasions at least, where you did a welcome to country for the AFL Dreamtime match in Darwin. I just checked the other day, and there's at least 250,000 views of your welcome to country. That must be one of the most viewed welcome to countries, you know, that I know of. I'm sure there may well be others, but it's certainly, that's an amazing achievement in a way, but also it's an interesting way to look at engagement. On one of those occasions, you're wearing a Flinders University shirt, I remember. And I remember my son pointing at the telly and saying, "Hey, look, there's Richie. He's got the Flinders shirt on." And there people were really excited about that. Tell us, you know, that is another way that universities can engage in a non-traditional academic forum. Can you tell us a little bit about that time and then the response you had after that?
So I suppose because of capacity, elders, and I think academics and Aboriginal people generally, we tend to wear a lot of hats and we code switch into different environments that we work across. But one of the things I'm always pushing for is when I was young, I would go to meetings and there was that one speaker who was always speaking over everybody else, or there was that one leader who you thought you would look up and was untouchable, you know. I wanted to change that idea around leadership. And so I always think of leadership as also being inclusive rather than exclusive. And so I think those words are really important to me because I try and live by those words, you know. I try to bring people in with everything that I do. But I started working for Legal Aid in '94 and I worked across, I think it's 40 community over 25 years just in the Northern Territory. And so when I did that welcome to country, I'd actually been to all those communities. And when I was sitting in the audience, I was looking and I was saying, oh, there's the Tiwi people over there. There's the Groote Island people, you know, oh, they're desert people over there. And it just jumped into my head and I went up and I did what you probably consider, you know, one of the most inclusive welcome to countries that's ever been had. Yeah, I walked off stage like it was a normal welcome to country. I had no idea that would have that impact, but or that kind of reach. But again, it's demonstrating not only to Larrakia, where I'm from in Darwin, it's not only demonstrated to Territorians, but everyone, anyone who saw it, that Australia can actually define itself about how we want to, direction we want to go in, and it has to be inclusive. You know, non-Aboriginal people obviously don't have all the answers. That's why they're coming to us all the time, you know. We don't always have the answers either. So we need each other. We need to work together so we can create better futures that'll benefit all of us.
Is there also something there, Richie, in that you're talking about the many hats and the blurring of boundaries between your many jobs? We need to maybe rethink about, well, how does a university engage? Maybe it doesn't need to be always in the traditional ways. Maybe we need to think more about the, you know, the whole lives of our people and the cultural offering that they have for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff. So do we need to think in different ways about how can this happen in some other occasions?
So I suppose the message of inclusiveness, and Dr. Bindi also talked about what the community means to you. You know, we as Aboriginal people, our community is our lifeline, it's our savior, it's our go-to place because it's our families, you know. But in the reverse, if we think about that in the reverse, we have to take the community to the leaders. We have to introduce the community people, the elders, you know, to the higher ups. So that at that high level in universities, they can see the way that we think and they can understand our worldviews. It's always communal. You know, Uncle Lewis O'Brien always talks about reciprocal exchange, where there's give, there's take, you know. And so I think the universities have to move away from those solid structures of, you know, leadership and governance and actually change the way their management functions. And we need those leaders that were around 10 years ago to actually change their leadership style and understand and listen to what we are saying as Aboriginal voices, because it can only benefit the universities.
I have to say,
sorry,
sorry,
Bindi,
sorry, Tim, I
you
was going
go.
to say I have to agree with that, and I'd love to see people from the higher up in the university come back into the communities as well, coming to NAIDOC, going to festivals, and actually sitting down in the dirt with elders and listening and getting that grassroots. We're always talking about impact, and I think that would be very impactful.
Well, if I might say, to add to that, elders are the gatekeepers to the communities. You know, our academics are gatekeepers to the communities. We are the one with the ability to reach out and say, come with me and meet my family, you know?
Absolutely. Marie, I thought it'd be great to get your thoughts on this. You've done a lot of work in engagement, and a lot of these opportunities, issues, and interesting incidents must be resonating with you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working not just in academia, like this is my 10th year now at Flinders University, but I've also worked with, you know, Aboriginal organisations, and I'm seeing that there is an appetite for our community to have more and more conversations with the university. And I just think it's time now for the university to reach out. And so, you know, positions like the elders on campus really become the interface for that negotiation and that conversation and that dialogue to, you know, sometimes start, but also to, you know, have some conversations that are really meaningful. So Bindi, when you talk about impact, you know, what we hear from a community and from an elders perspective is that, you know, we want our universities to do work that matter to community. You know, that's a message that keeps coming, you know, over and over again. And I suppose we're in a environment and climate where, you know, we've just come out of COVID. And so what we've been able to do at Post-SANT is to create spaces where the conversation can happen. So Richie, you did the Change in the Conversation webinars, you know, so every month we invited Community Mob to come and have a conversation with the university on topics that were relevant to them. But it was also an opportunity for community to ask questions of the university. So here is the beginning of a relationship or a conversation to occur. But most importantly, it's how we actually, you know, continue the conversation. So can we have more, you know, conversations like this online? Does the university need to do more community engagement events? We heard yesterday that, you know, it's incumbent of our university staff to be more at community events and to be visible. You know, that's really, really important. So I think, you know, there's what I would call an ecosystem. There's pockets of good work that's happening, but we also know that there's more work to be done. I think, from university, but we also know that there's an appetite for community to be more involved. And it's not just having our academic staff or our professional staff, but it's actually, you know, our universities belong to our community. And so they need to understand that relationship.
I think the other challenge, though, for universities is to be less siloed. So a lot of universities are doing exactly the same work with the same communities, and then it becomes exhausting to have to engage with 2 or 3 or 4 universities. If we can come together and collaborate and actually have spaces where we work and support each other, both as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics, but also as universities, I think that would be great. I think universities are very competitive against each other, but in this space, I think they actually need to become much more collaborative. Things become free and online and accessible for actually grassroots practitioners and people in those communities, so that it's not just a Q1 journal output, or it actually becomes something that becomes we can interact with and grow from and actually get real benefit from.
Bindi, do you see much? That certainly seems to be a common problem, that the community is getting exhausted, particularly, you know, in specific areas. You know, Alice Springs and Darwin and so on. Some communities there have reported getting many approaches from different universities. How does that happen? How do you actually get the collaboration happening so Do you think there is hope that it will happen? Because it is such a competitive sector.
I think that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics more and more are becoming clear on collaboration and benefit, and I think it comes through the ethics process and in expressions of interest for grants, where the university can engage Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people to actually look at it in the early stages and to say, actually, we need to engage the community more, or have you worked with these other people and be more inclusive? So I think there are ways to do this, and we have more and more online platforms. And although we're not always fans of them as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, it's actually better that we talk than not talk. So I think there could be new ways of creating spaces. I know that Macquarie University has just opened up a new facility for violence against women, and it looks really fantastic, quite frankly. And it's like, well, how can we all be part of that? How can we all have voice in that? Let's not silo, let's be more inclusive. So I think it's something we could actually talk more about and create more about. But for us as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics, for me personally, I'm interested in opening up those spaces rather than continuing to silo them.
If I could say something there, Tim, just to add to Bindi's comment, the conversations we had yesterday were one of, we know who our academics are, we know who our leaders are, and that there is a need to not just work within our own universities, but to work, across institutions. So, enabling that collective voice, and we're seeing that more and more. And I think this is going to be, something that's incumbent of the universities to support. We're not just about our own university, but we want to have that cross-institutional collaboration to get that strong Indigenous higher ed voice, heard.
And if I can add to that also, I think what Maria's saying is absolutely right, because that's the way the community operates, communally, and so when universities in the past have said, I'm University A and I'm against University B, we're in competition, that really kind of undoes the thought or process of Aboriginal people. We are here working for the universities, knowing that our community is watching us as elders, as academics, as people who are leaders. And we are trying to say to our youth, you can become me. We want you to be better than me, because that's what our elders would have wanted from us, And that's why, as I go back to Uncle Lewis, the exchange, it's, we know when our positions, community watching us all the time, and we're opening that space for them to come into the university. But in the conduit in the middle, we're also the mechanisms that the university has to, get greater reach for that community. And so it's got to be a door that swings both ways. Yeah.
Bindi, how do you deal with, obviously you can only control what you say and not what other people perceive you saying, but how do you go and start to change their perceptions? So if that's, so instead of them thinking, well, that's Bindi, she's talking about that issue again, it's, oh, I've heard that Bindi raised that before and maybe I'll listen this time. How do you think as a sector we're moving in that direction? And do you think there are things that we can do to make that transition happen?
To be honest with you, I think that's why we make policy. And so then I don't have to be the person all the time. I can actually say, well, actually our reconciliation action plan says we're going to do that, or our campus operation plan says we're going to do that, or our research strategy says we're going to do that. But for me, it's actually forming allyships. And a lot of people actually really do want to listen and learn and grow. And so it's tapping into that and finding what that person's strength is and where they want to start. So some people want to start very small, and I think that's absolutely great, and it's building their confidence in that space. Some people want to just grow and get better and better. So for me, I'm finding relationships are building pretty quickly because people actually have passions around certain things. They might have passions around making the ethics process better, or to making engagement better or impact better. So if we can tap into that, we can actually find things that we can come together on. You want impact and I want impact for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. So how do we work together to make us both happy? So I sort of say, if I can make your job easier, then you're going to make my job easier. So that's how I've sort of been building it. But I'm sure I've got a lot more to learn. So.
Richie,
I have to
we
say,
talked-
nicely said. That's so accurate.
Richie, also in terms of changing perceptions, we talked about the Lunch and Learn program. Can you tell us a bit about that and how it's aiming to change perceptions and bring sort of community and university together?
Yeah, okay. So when I started working at Flinders as the elder on campus in Darwin, some of the year 3 and 4 medical students come and see me. They work at the hospital, and they said, you know, when they was in year 1 and 2, they was at the university studying, and then they cast into the hospital setting, and a lot of them had never seen, you know, or worked with Aboriginal people in that depth before. So it created a culture shock for them, you know, when they were saying, is there any way that we can look at reducing that? And so I actually had to do a lot of reflection and thinking, you know. One of the wisest things that's ever been said to me, and I share this with everyone, is if you want to learn about Aboriginal people, look, listen, learn. 3 steps, you know, and you never stop doing that. But I listened to the students, and I did a lot of reflection, and then I decided to create a space where we would invite the students in for lunch once a month, and I would actually bring in a service provider and sit down and spend 20 minutes in front of maybe 15 to 25 students, and they would sit down and tell us what their service provider does and what it delivers to the community. And so there's a couple of good things you get out of that. Is one, the students become more comfortable speaking with Aboriginal people at an early stage in their learning. So it becomes embedded in their learning. And so by the time, after 2 years of Lunch and Learn, they should have no problems going to the hospital and talking to Aboriginal patients. Sure, it's slightly different, but there's a less culture shock. It reduces it. But at the same time, they're also creating students with more awareness about what community services are out there and what they provide for the community. So we're actually creating better advocates for our patients, because then they've just got a in-depth knowledge of, okay, for example, the first time I invited in the Stolen Generations organisation in Darwin, and they basically 5 questions, including tell us about yourself, how many people in your organisation, when did you start, what is your purpose, and how can we find out more? You know, that's all it takes. And then you have that good icebreaker discussion going. So that goes for about 20 minutes. And then for the rest of the 40 minutes, we sit there and eat pizza. You know, it's an opportunity for the students to talk with these people indirectly, but we're also recording these and building this into a library for future students. And so the services are more than happy to come and do their self-promotion, you know, but it's quite smart when you think about it, because, you know, there are services out there today, I don't know what they do. The services today, we don't know they exist, you know, but by doing this, we're networking, we're building our capacity on knowledge bases, and we're recording it, we're saving it, we're building a library into this, so it can be used in the future.
And has that been positively received by the students, Richie?
Yeah, so one of the things that I do with the students is, because I've worked in the community so long, I know, like, I could easily name like 10 to 20 organisations, write them up on a whiteboard and say, who do you guys want to see next? And so the students have that ownership of power and direction, and they can say, okay, so after the Stolen Generation group, we had Larrakia Nation, and who are the local traditional owners. They have over 600 members in Darwin, and they run night patrol, day patrol, aged care, youth services. But I had their one of the coordinators come in and talk about the services they deliver, you know, and some of the students can even go and do voluntary work there. And so then I said, okay, who's next off the list? They wanted the Aboriginal Interpreter Service. Now, I didn't know this myself, but the Aboriginal Interpreter Services deliver services still today in Darwin. There's over 100 languages being used in Darwin at Royal Darwin Hospital. And I wouldn't have thought it was that many. I probably would have said 50, you know. And so it goes to show we're learning things that we actually don't know.
That's fascinating. 100 languages is amazing.
Mm.
It's quite daunting just to think of, you know, finding the right interpreter for the right moment and getting across that. But it's, yeah, it's I guess that's one of the great things that you discover along the way. Bindi, we're talking about engagement and different initiatives that work. You mentioned, Richie's mentioned Lunch and Learn. You mentioned finding allies. Are there any other specific things that work to get people on board or save you time in having to sort of explain yourself constantly?
There's a lot of reading that people can do on their own, and a lot of they can actually teach themselves. And there's a lot of tools, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culturally informed tools, and Indigenous Allied Health Australia are a great website to go and sort of get some tools from and engage with. They run workshops as well. So there's a lot of other places that people can do a lot of work, which would save us a lot of time. So I always sort of say, can you Google this before you come to see? If you've Googled it and you can't find it, then for sure. But ask me rather than not ask me. So there's no stupid questions. If there's sometimes we can ask questions and we can feel embarrassed. I do sometimes, you know, feel really embarrassed, but it's better to get it right and be a little embarrassed than get it wrong and be a lot embarrassed.
Absolutely. And so do you have you Googled it as your mantra when you first answer the phone?
No, but can we? I might make it. I might write another topic on it. But you know, like there's so much out there. When I was younger, there wasn't the same amount of books and shows and information out there. So if you're interested in, or even so Newcastle University has that massacre, and you may or may not like that as an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander person, but still there's information is information. If that makes sense, and you can actually start to inform yourself. And then I always say, go out to the community, like go to NAIDOC, go to an event and actually speak to people, and that's advice from art and locally, and support people and have those opportunities as well. It all starts with you speaking to someone Aboriginal, starting to learn a little bit about how they see this is how you see it.
Tim, if I could just say something, you know, just in our previous session, there was our colleagues talking about from campus to country, and that embodied experience that a student could experience as they're coming in and onto the campus. So I think that goes back to also your point, Bindi, around how do we actually have other ways of understanding impact, so that artifacts and poetry actually become a part of that experience. And also I think there's something to be said there about the multimodal experience as well. And if we could do more of that, that would be, you know, more and more enticing, I think. It's one for students as a cultural, you know, safe place, but also this is about celebration of culture and knowledge. So I think if there's more initiatives like that, the creation of more spaces, I think that's going to make better for not just the student experience, but one for staff as well.
Absolutely. Bindi, would it make your life easier if there are more of you? So, you know, by growing the number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics, finding ways to bring them more through to the social work field, for example, does that then start to make your life easier?
Yes, it's my absolute aim in life is to not create more Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics, PhD students, master's students, policy creators, the whole kit caboodle. So for me, more bodies, more voices, more diversity, more say is what we need, because as we heard, over 100 languages, and where are those represented? Where are those knowings, doings and beings represented? So we're only one person and we only have one voice and one way of being. We have to have one. But we're also so little of us. When we think that sometimes we're only 1% of a university staff force, that is not a lot of people. So being able to be safe and have a place where you can actually talk with people. I noticed I was in a meeting yesterday and I was sitting with all the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, because that's, as we've said, that's our home, that's our comfortable space, it's where we can be ourselves. So being able to have that, but then also being able to take that amount of bodies out and culturally inform and make other people capable, that's what it's all about.
There's been a question come through saying, thanks for a great session, fostering valuable learning. Is there information available online about your VR learning project, Bindi, and also, Richie, your lunch and learn session? We can certainly provide some information on the conference website with links to the announcement. Is there anything else that Richie or Bindi that you would point people to?
We will have a social, we will have a social media platform for the grant and for that. So please hit me up in the meantime, because the grant doesn't start till February, so we haven't quite got everything up, but we will have a space.
Yeah, and I'd just say for me is, if anyone wants to know more, just contact me.
Fantastic. Great. Excellent. Well, that's a really great place to leave the session. I think it's been a really fascinating session. I'd have to concur that I've learned a lot during this session. Also found it really, really interesting to get some insights, and it's made me rethink, how engagement could happen into the future. Marie, did you have any observations before we finish up?
Sorry, just to congratulate Dr. Bindi on her recent award, so thank you. And that some of our conversations, Uncle Richie's Lunch and Learn, will be available on the Health Game Changers website, so we'll have those available, but also have a look at some of the conversations that Uncle Richie has had over the last 12 months. So that's there for the audience to look at. And just a reminder that the recordings for our online sessions for the conference will be available as well. So thank you to everybody, but in particular, thanks Uncle Richie and Dr. Bindi.